I'd have no energy to get out of bed. It was almost as if, like, if I'm not going to drink, I've got no reason to live.
Yeah, I was pushing the gates of hell open on my own. There was no one shoving me down there with pitchforks. I was to myself.
And it was shut the doors, close the curtains, and it was me and my wine.
You know, I would drink when it was rainy, I would drink when it was sunny, I'd drink if I felt down, I'd drink if I felt up, drink if I felt nothing at all.
This week's episode follows another 4 people: Dougie, Stuart, T and Shireen. People from different walks of life and countries of origin, all of them experiencing a long and hard drinking history. Their stories cover early experiences with alcohol, the progression of this disease and consequences in their lives, the low point, and finally their journey into recovery.
I was a very shy girl. I would walk past people, sometimes family, in the street, and I would actually cross the road so I didn't have to say hello to them. My father is an alcoholic, his father is an alcoholic, and a lot of my cousins are. Some of my first memories are me hiding underneath a table and my father hitting my mother.
There was no doubt there was a feeling of difference, and it was amplified within the family. Because in fact, not only did I feel different, but I was treated differently. I think it was being the baby.
What I remember the most is waiting for the next thing to happen. Feeling like I needed to walk on eggshells all the time. Well, there was sexual abuse in our family. And my father abused all 3 of us. I think it started when I was about 3 or 4 and finished when I was about 15.
Yeah, I'd always been prone to to have weight problems. I think there was probably a bit of a protection. I did always feel quite self-conscious, I must say.
For many years, there was a leaning towards the genetic component. People were saying, well, you're either born an addict or you're not. Very often, you might not have a genetic predisposition to addiction, but if all the components in your environment, all the dysfunctional components in your environment exist to create fertile soil, addiction can take root in any event.
My drinking coincided with my mother's illness and death. My mother had cancer and she died when I was 14. When I first started, it made me feel comfortable.
13, I started alcohol. I had my first drink at 13 and got drunk for the first time.
If you had to take a 12, 13-year-old who had some of the traits, it would be very hard to predict whether they're really going to develop into full-blown addicts, because there's so many variables that can come into play.
Don't consciously remember drinking until I was about 16 or 17 in the later years of school. Kind of rites of passage, you know, we kind of went into pubs and asked if they sold beer in a very manly voice.
I think I was about 16 or 17. I hear a lot of people say that when they picked up their first drink, they'd found the love of their life and everything changed. It's not like that for me.
As I got older, alcohol was more available, you know, and so much more acceptable. I could use it a lot more. With the alcohol, I was a binge drinker. So I would go the whole week without drinking, but then on the weekends, I had to have a party. And I had to get so drunk, and that pattern carried on for many years. But it was also more the behavior, the unmanageable behavior that went with it, the temper tantrums, and that I was running around in circles all the time. I didn't even know about addiction. I knew nothing.
I do remember very quickly, I certainly get into the habit of drinking regularly, even though I didn't particularly like the taste, to be honest. I loved the effect. It didn't really seem out of the ordinary. Having said that, I did notice over the years, as I started to grow into manhood and, you know, got married, had family, certainly the space between my drinks used to get shorter. I mean, very quickly I was a regular weekend drinker, even in my late teens, early 20s. And certainly by my mid-20s, more days during the week than less I would be drinking. And certainly the weekend drinking to excess. I remember even then thinking, I wonder if I've got a problem.
People often say, well, I don't have the addiction, so I'm okay, I can still use. Whereas certain indicators certainly show that you're definitely at high risk of developing these changes.
My relationship with alcohol felt kind of slow to get going. I feel like I had a healthy fear about it in the beginning. But whenever I did drink with my friends, I think I could pretty much safely say that I drank more than them. We drank every other night at home. So a lot of my drinking was about controlling it, making sure that I kept within limits. I can definitely say now that I drank more in times of despair.
When I first started, it made me feel comfortable. I didn't think there was any problem with what I did until I hit my mid-20s. And my then wife actually confronted me and said, I think you're an alcoholic and you need help. And at that stage, I started to admit I was an alcoholic. The feeling was there. The feeling was there saying, don't do this. But this kept telling you that it was the thing to do and it was okay. All the way through, there were warning signs. You know, the days started to get more difficult. And strangest of all, I mean, a real fear started building up in me.
We need to have definitions of when, sort of categorically, this is abuse, this is now dependence. But your brain doesn't kind of overnight become dependent. It's a process where very gradual brain changes begin to take place.
Actually, if I didn't have to go into the office, I probably would stay in and drink the whole day. But certainly if I had to go to the office, I would go in. Frequently have bottles in my cabinet. Maybe have a couple of snorts out the bottle and hide it. Do something, or look as if I was doing something. Then go out late morning to have a couple of beers. Come back about 2, finish about 4. And funnily, I was about a 15-minute drive from my office to the house, and I used to buy my bottle plus a small quarter bottle to drink in the car on the way home. When I got home, you know, wouldn't eat, close the curtains and just drink into oblivion. And that was pretty much a standard day.
I was getting divorced, so my children spent half the time with me, half the time with their father. And I drank when they weren't with me. And I drank a lot. My drinking just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. In the last 6 months, it progressed so much. It scared the living daylights out of me. My health was failing. I was feeling suicidal a lot of the time.
Taking as a given that the night before I'd been drinking and using. But I'd had a little something to take the edge off. Not too much, because I was intending that day to go out and do something. And I'd go to the gym, and I just went and sat in the steam room and tried to steam out the smell that was in me. Then I'd come out of the gym, the pubs would be opening, go into the bar, find my dealer. The main thing was to get far enough away from where we were all kind of known during the day so that I could come back to meet all my pals that were working, so I could tell them what a fantastic day I'd had and have a drink with them, because they were having a drink after work, you know.
The days that I would be drinking, I would attempt to go to work. I was working for myself then, So it's almost like the days that I was drinking, I was happier. And then I would get up and I would try to do some work. And I'd sit at my computer and stare at it for about an hour. Or I don't know if I was warming up or not. And then I would work. I'd say I'm going for lunch with somebody. I'd have every intention of going back to work after that, but I'd never hit the office after that, because once I'd start drinking, I'd never stop drinking. And then I'd drink the rest of the day. On the days that I wasn't drinking, I wouldn't get out of bed. I would just stay in bed all day. I'd have no energy to get out of bed. It was almost as if, like, if I'm not going to drink, I've got no reason to live.
It becomes a kind of a compulsion. You cannot live without it. It forms an extremely big part of your life. And later you neglect your relationships, your work, your finances, all because of this drug or alcohol or the addictive substance.
The whole society, the family, the whole community, everyone is negatively affected by this disorder.
My family at the time just didn't want to know me. You know, I was having quite a lot of communication issues with my daughter at the time, who was just young. My business partners were actually quite baffled by me, I think. They used to pull me up all the time about things that weren't happening, that I said were going to happen. I was just completely unreliable to them. And certainly towards the end, they get very bitter and angry, and I understand that perfectly now.
Well, I'd had a number of suicide attempts, one in the sea, one with pills. I had no sustainable relationships whatsoever. My home life was pretty miserable. I fought with my father, I fought with my mother.
Well, yeah, I mean, there were definitely consequences. I mean, in terms of my education, I'd dropped out of school in the first place and taken a job, which had allowed me to start the kind of daily drinking. Initially, I think it was things like disappointment. You know, because I'd constantly say, yeah, no worries, I'll do this and I'll do that, and it never quite got done. For me, alcoholism plays with time a lot, I will do that one day, and 5 years later I haven't done it. In terms of, specific relationships, there was specific people that I kind of hurt. I wouldn't have been able to live with that feeling if I hadn't medicated that feeling.
I wasn't being the mother that I wanted to be. And from the moment that I had children, I always had this idea that I completely and utterly wanted to break the cycle of my upbringing. And here I was, doing the same thing.
Addiction is very often quite devastating and affects more than any other brain disease, the whole family, the community, the society. It often starts with simple things like relationship difficulties and ends up with job losses, marriages that are destroyed, and people end up throwing away all their values, their morals, and it cycles down. People often end up homeless, families alienated, and they may commit suicide, they may end up in prison.
I went out on the Friday night, got really, really, really drunk, that I fell down the stairs. When I woke up in the morning in the bed, it was one of those mornings where you had to try and piece together the night before, and you look down and my legs were just full of blood. And then I phoned my friend and she said, no, then you'd fallen down the stairs. Then I had remembered. I thought, I can't do this on my own because I can't live like this anymore. I hated my life. I hated myself.
Any spark of like anything that was close to something spiritual in me had been snuffed out. I mean, people, you know, we hear the phrase spiritually bankrupt quite a lot. I was dead inside. The absolute pain of emptiness, just gone, nothing there. That's what made me want to stop.
You know, in living this double life, you know, I'm pretending to be okay. I'm pretending not to have a hangover. I'm pretending not to need a drink. And pretending to be patient. I was scared. I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live without it, but I needed to live without it. My life was a complete and utter disaster.
That last week of my drinking, I was house sitting for a friend of mine who had asked if I'd been drinking. I'd phone called and I'd said I hadn't. That was on the Wednesday. I can remember then waking up on the Friday with complete mayhem, phone calls jingling and asking where I was. I thought it was still the same day, but it was now 2 days down the line. I had missed an absolutely vital meeting for the company that would have, if it had succeeded, would put us into a different league. I missed that. The whole thing was just a mess. That morning after I woke up, I just knew that there was something wrong with me. I knew it. And I remember thinking, I'm in trouble. I'm really in trouble. I cannot do this anymore. And it literally was as quick as that. You know, it was over from that point.
I had dinner with friends and there was a girl there. And she'd said to me, you know, Shireen, if you can't do it alone, give me a ring. I have a way to help you. And when I woke up on that Sunday morning, I think it was just divine grace. I thought, how did I do that? And her words came into my head. I thought, I can't do this on my own. I need to phone her. I need her help. So I picked up the phone and she answered. And I said to her, I need help. She said, no problem. It's amazing how just by asking other people for help and having some belief, what can happen.
I had already sought help from people who were sober, and they helped me. I mean, they showed me a way to be able to look at what was really wrong with me and to be able to deal, first of all, with my alcoholism, and secondly, how to live relatively normally. I was still very confused at the time. I mean, I wasn't physically that damaged, but emotionally I was a complete wreck because I had no crutch to look at now, you know. There was no booze around. And it kind of evened out, I would say, after a couple of months. It started to get a bit quieter inside.
I was absolutely ready for it. I had wanted to go into rehab for a long time, but the fear of people finding out what I had just stopped me. But it got to the point where it was my life that I was talking about, and the fear didn't exist anymore. And I just thought, just do what you have to, because I can't live like this anymore.
I was lucky I got help from a good friend and found myself in rehab. A colleague of mine calls it discovery when you're in treatment and recovery when you're out. And I think that's quite nice, you know. You discover that you're ill. You discover what's happened and you discover that you can do something about it if you choose to. I had no idea that you could actually go through a day without using something. This wasn't a life without using, right? This is like a different life.
I wasn't put on this earth for misery. I took some action. And I started to do things differently. So I have a belief now that everything might not be the way I want it to be, but everything's the way that it should be. And that there is this really loving, guiding presence. There's a lot of love. And I have a lot of love to give.
But it's just about kindness. That's for me, is what I'm doing the kindest thing I'm capable of doing today.
When I came into recovery, I was feeling suicidal a lot of the time. And I'm a year and a half on now. And I don't want to... I've got the same issues going on in my life, but I want to live. And I have, I've got a sense of peace. So the 12-step program has shown me a way to live. And it's very subtle the way it does it. And it takes time.
The 12 steps is a spiritual approach. It's got the advantage in that it's a very wide network of help internationally.
I do have a contact with God. I start my day off more often than not with 10-15 minutes quiet time, asking this power to be present and allow me to demonstrate love, you know, in everything that I do. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong. And throughout the day, if I'm ever feeling a bit scared or a bit not too sure, I can invite that power to be present. The 12-step program talks about a spiritual idea and a practical program of action, and I've found that, I think that's been one of the joys of recovery. It's just finding that spirituality isn't something up there or out there or after I die. It's kind of right here and now.
Well, I think the strength of the 12-step program, it integrates an external structure with a developing spiritual reality. It brings God into the picture. It helps people to see that their lives need to have the bigger focus of having a connection with the spiritual self, with the spiritual God, and also then restructuring their lifestyle and the way they go about healing the relationships and the processes that have come unstuck. So it is a good package for working on many different levels.
When I came into the 12-step program, I was a wreck. Physically, mentally, emotionally, just a wreck. I suppose one of the things that sobriety has done is just, it's kind of allowed me to turn up to life and live sober. I've cleaned up my act. I've been able to look at the wreckage and the mayhem that I visited in people. You know, our 12-step invites us to help other alcoholics and addicts who are in trouble. And I'd love to tell you I get perfect 10s every day, and it's a lie, you know, but I'm kind of on that right path.
I'm not running around in circles anymore. You know, I have an inner peace that I never had before. Sometimes I can just sit, you know. I don't run away anymore. It's about today, not tomorrow. What am I doing right now?
And sure, there's been serious, you know, personal issues have come up for me in my recovery. But you know what? It's the same thing. You know, these things happen to people. Things that I used to find difficult, I find less difficult because I accept.
I started working a 12-step recovery program. I've made it a huge part of my life. I knew that I had to have something to replace the alcohol. I've got friends now, true friends. I've got people that I can reach out to.
And so these spiritual verities that you speak of suddenly become a part of just your daily way of living.
I'm still ambitious. I haven't lost who I am. Sometimes I'd like to be less selfish, you know? I'd like to contribute more to world peace, because you can't get world peace unless you're contributing to world peace.
So pretty much what I try to do is be present, be part of whatever I can, and do the best I can to be, just to be. That's my ambition, to be.
I try not to think too much about the future. I mean, I'm doing something at the moment that has been a 20-year dream, and that's to study art.
My life is very varied. I still actively participate in sport, keep fit. My children are here. I live in a beautiful country, and really, you know, the world's opening up to me.
If you're happy, and you can only tell yourself, you can only be honest with yourself, if you're happy, keep doing what you're doing. If you're unhappy, change something.
When your time is right, take the chance. It's worth it.
If they find they're a real alcoholic and addict, is that they get themselves involved in the 12-step programs as quickly as they can.
Don't get compassionate help. Get help where people will tell you the truth about yourself, and listen to them, and have faith and trust and courage that it will work.
Next week we look at drug addiction, focusing on so-called street drugs. 4 characters will take us through their stories, graphically sharing about their childhood, the pain and chaos of active addiction, and their journey into the life of recovery. Our hope is that after watching these programs, anyone affected by the consequences of addiction, be it the addict themselves, family members, friends, work colleagues and communities at large, will better understand addiction and be able to make informed decisions regarding seeking help, advice, counseling, and support.